Digress. And welcome back to I Digress, in which we drag ourselves through the Hound of the Baskervilles, and it's quite late at night. It's 21:08, and we got halfway through a chapter last time. We're at 78% of the novel, which I think is always the best way to talk about a novel in terms of the percentage. It's very businesslike. It's like, a shopkeeper dividing it up and going, we're 78% through, and we're going to carry on. Watson's talking, and I can't remember what's happened. They've just identified on the walls of the manor house a portrait of one of the old Baskervilles, and they've gone, ooh, doesn't he look like Stapleton? And apparently he does. And carrying on. Here we go. Try and push on a little bit. I was up betimes in the morning, but Holmes was afoot earlier still, for we saw him as I dressed, coming up the drive. We saw him, for I saw him. Yes, we should have a full day today, he remarked, and he rubbed his hands with the joy of action. The nets are all in place, and the drag is about to begin. We'll know before the day is out whether we have caught our big, lean-jawed pike, or whether he has got through the meshes. Don't tell him, Pike. Have you been on the moor already? I have sent a report from... very loutish sounding. Have you been on the moor already? The moor already? I have sent a report from Grimpen to Princetown, as to the death of Selden. I think I can promise that none of you will be troubled in the matter. And I have also communicated with my friend Cartwright, who would certainly have pined away at the door of my hut, as a dog does at his master's grave, if I had not set his mind at rest about my safety. Poor young chap. Lying around all night in the cold and damp, pining for like a dog. What is the next move? To see Sir Henry? Ah, here he is. Good morning, Holmes, said the baronet. You look like a gentleman you look like a general who is planning a battle with his chief of the staff. That is the exact situation. Watson was asking for orders. And so do I. Very good. You are engaged, as I understand, to dine with our friends the Stapletons tonight. I hope that you will come also. They are very hospitable people, and I am sure that they would be very glad to see you. I fear that Watson and I must go to London. To London? Yes, I think that we should be more useful there at the present juncture. The Baron's face perceptibly lengthened. I hoped that you were going to see me through this business. The hall and the moor are not very pleasant places when one is alone. Beautifully delivered. My dear fellow, you must trust me implicitly, and do exactly what I tell you. You can tell your friends that we should have been happy to have come with you, but that urgent business required us to be in town. We hope very soon to return to Devonshire. Will you remember to give them that message, if you insist upon it? There is no alternative, I assure you. I saw by the baronet's clouded brow that he was deeply hurt by what he regarded as our desertion. When do you desire to go? He asked coldly, sounding like one of the characters in Little Women, or A Little House on the Prairie, or something with little in it. Immediately after breakfast we will drive into Coombe Tracy, snatch a burger at the Burger and Go, but Watson will leave his things as a pledge that he will come back to you. Watson, you will send a note to Stapleton to tell him that you regret that you cannot come. I have a good mind to go to London with you, said the baronet. Why should I stay here alone? Oh, pull yourself together. Because it is your post of duty, because you gave me your word that you would do as you were told, and I tell you to stay. All right, then, I'll stay. One more direction. I wish you to drive to Merrypit House. Send back your trap, however, and let them know that you intend to walk home. To walk across the moor? Yes, but that is the very thing which you have so often cautioned me not to do. This time you may do it with safety. If I had not every confidence in your nerve and courage, I would not suggest it. But it is essential that you should do it. Then I will do it. And, as you value your life, Do not go across the moor in any direction save along the straight path which leads from Merrypit House to the Grimpen Road, and is your natural way home." "I will do just what you say. Very good. I should be glad to get away as soon after breakfast as possible, so as to reach London Yes, struggling there, so as to reach London in the afternoon." I was much astounded by this programme, though I remembered that Holmes had said to Stapleton on the night before that his visit would terminate next day. It had not crossed my mind, however, that he would wish me to go with him, nor could I understand how we could both be absent at a moment which he himself declared to be critical. "Yeah, you'll get there, Watson, probably. Keep thinking." There was nothing for it, however, but implicit obedience. So we bade good-bye to our rueful friend, and a couple of hours afterwards, and a brace of cheeseburgers, we were at the station of Coombe Tracey, and had dispatched the trap upon its return journey. A small boy was waiting upon the platform. Boom. A small boy was waiting upon the platform. "Any orders, sir? You will take this train to town, Cartwright. The moment you arrive, you will send a wire to Sir Henry Baskerville, in my name, to say that if he finds the pocket-book which I have dropped, he is to send it by registered post to Baker Street. Yes, sir. And ask at the station office if there is a message for me." The boy returned with a telegram, which Holmes handed to me. It ran, "Wire received, coming down with unsigned warrant, arrive 5:40 Lestrade." That isn't... Yes, that was very quick thinking of me, because I looked ahead and I saw Lestrade, and I was just about to turn it into a terrible Cockney-esque policeman, in the style of Dick Van Dyke. That is in answer to mine of this morning. He is the best of the professionals, I think, and we may need his assistance. Now, Watson, I think that we cannot employ our time better than by calling upon your acquaintance, Mrs. Laura Lyons." His plan of campaign was beginning to be evident. He would use the baronet in order to convince the Stapletons that we were really gone, while we should actually return at the instant when we were likely to be needed. That telegram from London, if mentioned by Sir Henry to the Stapletons, must remove the last suspicions from their minds. Already I seem to see our nets. Already I seem to see our nets drawing closer around that lean-jawed pike. Mrs. Laura Lyons was in her office, and Sherlock Holmes opened his interview with a frankness and directness which considerably amazed her. "I am investigating the circumstances which attended the death of the late Sir Charles Baskerville," said he. "My friend here, Dr. Watson, has informed me of what you have communicated, and also of what you have withheld in connection with that matter." "What have I withheld?" she asked defiantly. "You have confessed that you asked Sir Charles to be at the gate at 10 o'clock. We know that that was the place and hour of his death. You have withheld what the connection is between these events." "There is no connection. In that case, the coincidence must indeed be an extraordinary one. But I think that we shall succeed in establishing a connection after all. I wish to be perfectly frank with you, Mrs. Lyons. With regard to this case, we regard this case as one of murder, and the evidence may implicate not only your friend Mr. Stapleton, but his wife as well." The lady sprang from her chair. "His wife?" she cried. "The fact is no longer a secret. The person who has passed for his sister is really his wife." Mrs. Lyons had resumed her seat. Her hands were grasping the arms of her chair, and I saw that the pink nails had turned white with the pressure of her grip. "His wife," she said again. "His wife? He is not a married man?" Sherlock Holmes shrugged his shoulders. "Prove it to me, and if you can do so—" The fierce flash of her eyes said more than any words. "I have come prepared to do so," said Holmes, drawing several papers from his pocket. "Here is a photograph of the couple taken in York 4 years ago. It is endorsed Mr. and Mrs. Vandeleur. But you will have no difficulty in recognizing him, and her also, if you know her by sight. Here are 3 written descriptions by trustworthy witnesses of Mr. and Mrs. Vandeleur, who at that time kept St. Oliver's private school. Read them, and see if you can doubt the identity of these people." She glanced at them, and then looked up at us with the set, rigid face of a desperate woman. "Mr. Holmes," she said, This man had offered me marriage, on condition that I could get a divorce from my husband. He has lied to me, the villain, in every conceivable way. Not one word of truth has he ever told me. And why? I imagined that all was for my own sake. But now I see that I was never anything but a tool in his hands. Why should I preserve faith with him, who never kept any with me? Why should I try to shield him from the consequences of his own wicked acts? Ask me what you like, and there is nothing which I shall hold back. One thing I swear to you, and that is that when I wrote the letter I never dreamed of any harm to the old gentleman, who had been my kindest friend." "I entirely believe you, madam," said Sherlock Holmes. "The recital of these events must be very painful to you. And perhaps it will make it easier if I tell you what occurred, and you can check me if I make any material mistake. The sending of this letter was suggested to you by Stapleton? He dictated it. I presumed that the reason he gave was that you would receive help from Sir Charles for the legal expenses connected with your divorce?" "Exactly. And then after you had sent the letter, he dissuaded you from keeping the appointment. He told me that it would hurt his self-respect that any other man should find the money for such an object, and that though he was a poor man himself, he would devote his last penny to removing the obstacles which divided us, and that though he was a poor man, he himself would devote his last penny to removing the obstacles which divided us. He appears to be a very consistent character. And then you heard nothing until you read the reports of the death in the paper?" "No." "And he made you swear to say nothing about your appointment with Sir Charles?" "He did. He said that the death was a very mysterious one, and that I should certainly be suspected if the facts came out. He frightened me into remaining silent, quite so." "But you had your suspicions?" She hesitated and looked down. "I knew him," she said. But if he had kept faith with me, I should always have done so with him." "I think that on the whole you have had a fortunate escape," said Sherlock Holmes. "You have had him in your power, and he knew it, and yet you are alive. You have been walking for some months very near to the edge of a precipice. We must wish you good morning now, Mrs. Lyons, and it is probable that you will very shortly hear from us again. Our case becomes rounded off, and difficulty after difficulty thins away in front of us," said Holmes as we stood waiting for the arrival of the express from town. "I shall soon be in the position of being able to put into a single connected narrative one of the most singular and sensational crimes of modern times. Students of criminology will remember the analogous incidents in Godno, in Little Russia, in the year 66. And of course there are the Anderson murders in North Carolina. But this case possesses some features which are entirely its own. Even now we have no clear case against this very wily man. But I shall be very much surprised if it is not clear enough before we go to bed this night." The London Express came roaring into the station, and a small wiry bulldog of a man had sprung from a first-class carriage. We all three shook hands, and I saw at once from the reverential way in which Lestrade gazed at my companion that he had learned a good deal since the days when they had first worked together. I could well remember the scorn which the theories of the reasoner used then to excite in the practical man. An altogether poorly executed sentence, as so many of the others, but this was particularly bad. I returned to the start. I could well remember the scorn. With which the theories of the reasoner used then to excite in the practical man. "Anything good?" he asked. "The biggest thing for years," said Holmes. "We have 2 hours before we need think of starting. I think we might employ it in getting some dinner, and then, Lestrade, we will take the London fog out of your throat by giving you a breath of the pure night air of Dartmoor. Never been there? Ah, well, I don't suppose you will forget your first visit. Ever been there? Ah, well, I don't suppose you will forget your first visit. And of course we can carry on a little bit, I suppose. We're now on 82%, and I wouldn't want you to think that I was purely thinking about percentages. It's late, and I've been sitting on this stool, which I have in this this booth, and frankly, I think I really need to lower the shelf upon which my various bits of equipment sit so that I can sit on a more comfortable chair and actually lean back, because sitting on a stool at my advanced and decrepit age is, akin to... I don't know. What's it akin to? It's akin to a sort of beanpole in a hurricane, stuck in the garden and being blown hither and thither. And, and it's sort of... It does bend my back a little bit, but feels very achy today. Chapter 14, The Hound of the Baskervilles. One of Sherlock Holmes's defects, if indeed one may call it a defect, was that he was exceedingly loath to communicate his full plans to any other person until the instant of their fulfilment. Partly it came, no doubt, from his own masterful nature, which loved to dominate and surprise those who were around him, partly also from his professional caution, which urged him never to take any chances. The result, however, was very trying for those who were acting as his agents and assistants. I had often suffered under it, but never more so than during that long drive in the darkness. The great ordeal was in front of us. At last we were about to make our final effort, and yet Holmes had said nothing, and I could only surmise what his course of action would be. My nerves thrilled with anticipation, when at last the cold wind upon our faces and the dark void spaces on either side of the narrow road told me that we were back upon the moor once again. Every stride of the horses and every turn of the wheels was taking us nearer to our supreme adventure. Our conversation was hampered. Our conversation was hampered by the presence of the driver of the hired wagonette. Roll-on, automatic, self-driving Uber robo-cars, when the presence of the driver of the hired wagonette won't interfere with us at all. We'll just be listened to by Google, and that will be transferred to the National Security Agency and any other agency that wants to listen to us. And I've become so paranoid in my later years. But of course, all these highly sophisticated robo-electric cars, self-driving cars, will record everything, every utterance, every vital sign, just in case we're likely to wrench the steering wheel or do something. So, of course, everything we say will be recorded, just in case we happen to be thinking of a criminal act, which we might be. And so anyway, auto-electric cars can't wait. Our conversation was hampered by the presence of the driver of the hired wagonette, so that we were forced to talk of trivial matters when our nerves were tense with emotion and anticipation. It was a relief to me, after that unnatural restraint, when we at last passed Franklin's house and knew that we were drawing near to the hall and to the scene of action. We did not drive up to the door, but got down near the gate of the avenue. The wagonette was paid off and ordered to return to Coombe Tracy forthwith, while we started to walk to Merripit House. "Are you armed, Lestrade?" The little detective smiled. "As long as I have my trousers, I have a hip pocket, and as long as I have my hip pocket, I have something in it." "Nevertheless, are you armed, Lestrade?" "Good. My friend and I are also ready for emergencies." "You're mighty close about this affair, Mr. Holmes. What's the game now?" "A waiting game." "My word, it does not seem a very cheerful place," said the detective with a shiver, glancing round him at the gloomy slopes of the hill and at the huge lake of fog which lay over the Grimpen Mire. "I see the lights of a house ahead of us. That is Merripit House, and the end of our journey. I must request you to walk on tiptoe and not to talk above a whisper." We moved cautiously along the track, as if we were bound for the house, but Holmes halted us when we were about 200 yards from it. "This will do," said he. "These rocks upon the right make an admirable screen. We are to wait here. Yes, we shall make our little ambush here. Get in this hollow, Lestrade. You have been inside the house, have you not, Watson? Can you tell the position of the rooms? What are those latticed windows at this end? I think they are the kitchen windows, and the one beyond, which shines so brightly? That is certainly the dining room. The blinds are up. You know the lie of the land best. Creep forward quietly and see what they are doing. But for heaven's sake, don't let them know that they are watched. Good idea, good tip. I tiptoed down the path and stooped behind the low wall which surrounded the stunted orchard. Creeping in its shadow, I reached a point whence I could look straight through the uncurtained window. There were only 2 men in the room, Sir Henry and Stapleton. They sat with their profiles towards me on either side of the round table. Both of them were smoking cigars, and coffee and wine were in front of them. Stapleton was talking with animation, but the baronet looked pale and distrait, or distray. Perhaps the thought of that lonely walk across the ill-omened moor was weighing heavily upon his mind. As I watched them, Stapleton rose and left the room, while Sir Henry filled his glass again and leaned back in his chair, puffing at his cigar. I heard the creak of a door and the lisp. And the lisp? Where did I get that from? I heard the creak of a door and the crisp sound of boots upon gravel. The steps passed across... So exciting. The steps passed along the path on the other side of the wall under which I crouched. Looking over, I saw the naturalist pause at the door of an outhouse in the corner of the orchard. A key turned in a lock, and as he passed in there was a curious scuffling noise from within. He was only a minute or so inside, and then I heard the key turn once more, and he passed me and re-entered the house. I saw him rejoin his guest, and I crept quietly back to where my companions were waiting to tell them what I had seen. "You say, Watson, that the lady is not there?" Holmes asked when I had finished my report. "No." "Where can she be? Since there is no light in any other room except the kitchen, I cannot think where she is. I have said that over the great Grimpen Mire there hung a dense white fog. It was drifting slowly in our direction, and banked itself up like a wall on that side of us, low but thick and well-defined. The moon shone on it, and it looked like a great shimmering ice field, with the heads of the distant tors as rocks borne upon its surface. Holmes's face was turned towards it, and he muttered impatiently as he watched its sluggish drift. "It's moving towards us, Watson. Is that serious?" "Very serious indeed. The one thing upon earth which could have disarranged my plans. He can't be very long now. It is already 10 o'clock. Our success, and even his life, may depend upon his coming out before the fog is over the path." The night was a bit of a groany noise. The night was clear and fine above us. The stars shone cold and bright, while a half-moon bathed the whole scene in a soft, uncertain light. Before us lay the dark bulk of the house, its serrated roof and bristling chimneys hard outlined against the silver-spangled sky. Broad bars of golden light from the lower windows stretched across the orchard and the moor. One of them was suddenly shut off. The servants had left the kitchen. There only remained the lamp in the dining room where the 2 men... the murderous host and the unconscious guest, still chatted over their cigars. Every minute, that white, woolly plain which covered one half of the moor was drifting closer and closer to the house. Already the first thin wisps of it were curling across the golden square of the lighted window. The farther wall of the orchard was already invisible, and the trees were standing out of a swirl of white vapour. As we watched it, the fog wreaths came crawling round both corners of the house and rolled slowly into one dense bank, on which the upper floor and the roof floated like a strange ship upon a shadowy sea. Holmes struck his hand passionately upon the rock in front of us and stamped his feet in his impatience. "If he isn't out in a quarter of an hour, the path will be covered. In half an hour we won't be able to see our hands in front of us. Shall we move farther back upon higher ground? Yes, I think it would be as well. So as the fog bank flowed onward, we fell back before it, until we were half a mile from the house, and still that dense white sea with the moon silvering its upper edge swept slowly and inexorably on. "We are going too far," said Holmes. "We dare not take the chance of his being overtaken before he can reach us. At all costs, we must hold our ground where we are." He dropped on his knees and clapped his ear to the ground. "Thank God, I think that I can hear him coming." A sound of quick steps broke the silence of the moor. Crouching among the stones, we stared intently at the silver-tipped bank in front of us. The steps grew louder, and through the fog, as through a curtain, there stepped the man whom we were awaiting. He looked round him in surprise as he emerged into the clear, starlit night. Then he came swiftly along the path, passed close to where we lay, and went on up the long slope behind us. As he walked, he glanced continually over either shoulder, like a man who is ill at ease. "Hist!" cried Holmes, and I heard the sharp click of a cocking pistol. "Look out! It's coming!" There was a thin, crisp, continuous patter from somewhere in the heart of that crawling bank. The cloud was within 50 yards of where we lay, and we glared at it, all three, uncertain what horror was about to break from the heart of it. I was at Holmes's elbow, and I glanced for an instant at his face. It was pale and exultant, his eyes shining brightly in the moonlight. But suddenly they started forward in a rigid, fixed stare, and his lips parted in amazement. At the same instant Lestrade gave a yell of terror, and threw himself face downward upon the ground. I sprang to my feet, my inert hand grasping my pistol, my mind paralyzed by the dreadful shape which had sprung out upon us from the shadows of the fog. A hound it was, an enormous, coal-black hound, but not such a hound as mortal eyes have ever seen. Fire burst from its open mouth, its eyes glowed with a smouldering glare, its muzzle and hackles and dewlap were outlined in flickering flame. Never, in the delirious dream of a disordered brain, could anything more savage, more appalling, more hellish be conceived than that dark form and savage face which broke upon us out of the wall of fog. With long bounds the huge black creature was leaping down the track, following hard upon the footsteps of our friend. So paralyzed were we by the apparition that we allowed him to pass before we had recovered our nerve. Then Holmes and I both fired together, and the creature gave a hideous howl, which showed that one, at least, had hit him. He did not pause, however, but bounded onward. Far away on the path we saw Sir Henry looking back, his face white in the moonlight, his hands raised in horror, glaring helplessly at the frightful thing which was hunting him down. But that cry of pain from the hound had blown all our fears to the winds. If he was vulnerable, he was mortal, and if we could wound him, we could kill him. Never have I seen a man run as Holmes ran that night. I am reckoned fleet of foot, but he outpaced me as much as I outpaced the little professional. In front of us, as we flew up the track, we heard scream after scream from Sir Henry and the deep roar of the hound. I was in time to see the beast spring upon its victim, hurl him to the ground, and worry at his throat, but the next instant Holmes had emptied 5 barrels of his revolver into the creature's flank. With a last howl of agony and a vicious snap in the air, it rolled upon its back, 4 feet pouring furiously, and then fell limp upon its side. I stooped, panting, and pressed my pistol to the dreadful shimmering head. But it was useless to press the trigger. The giant hound was dead. Sir Henry lay insensible where he had fallen. We tore away his collar, and Holmes breathed a prayer of gratitude when we saw that there was no sign of a wound and that the rescue had been in time. Already our friend's eyelids shivered, and he made a feeble effort to move. Lestrade thrust his brandy flask between the baronet's teeth, and 2 frightened eyes were looking up at us. "My God," he whispered, "what was it? What in heaven's name was it?" "It's dead, whatever it is," said Holmes. "We've laid the family ghost once and forever." There's the sound of a message coming through on my telephone, and how exciting that will be. But I think I might leave it there. Because, after all, that was very exciting. You need to sit down, and I need to lie down with a bunch of grapes and possibly a cup of tea. I'd like a cup of tea now, an English breakfast made by the wonderful company of Twinings. No, I'm not being sponsored by them, which is unusual, isn't it? Because most podcasts you hear, there's someone going, "If you want your envelopes delivered quickly and efficiently, why not use US Mail Wizard? They are the people who I turn to when I need a letter sent somewhere like Spokane, or Tallahassee, or possibly Medicine Bow in Wyoming." Starring Doug McClure and James Drury. The Virginian, one of my favourite programmes, and if anyone wants to find me a Christmas or combined Christmas and birthday present, I believe the DVDs of The Virginian are available, and that would be brilliant. I'd, please get hold of them, club together, and send them to me. US Mail Express, if you... Yes, thank you. So that's me. We've still got the right to, post things on the internet. They haven't quite shut it down yet, but I sense it's close. I sense it's very close, and, people are being banged up in prison. You have to be very careful what you say about almost anything these days, and, there we are. I'm going to go and have a couple of, paranoia pills and, fashion another bonnet out of Baco foil and hope that the deadly rays aren't getting in or out of my cranium. And no, I don't know what I'm on about, really. I had a nice dinner, and it's supposed to be a fast day, but it's not gone quite as well as usual in that I had my porridge this morning, and I hurled in a handful of fruits of the forest, frozen. I warmed them up in the porridge, very nice. And what did I just have for my tea? A baked potato. Well, I don't usually have a baked potato, dear listener, and with some chili, which probably is rather fatty, But hey, you can't deny yourself every day, can you? And thanks for listening anyway. And this podcast, as you may have noticed, is still available on iTunes and via podbean.com, but it's now going to a different destination on YouTube, which if you found it on YouTube, you'll know where it is, and if you haven't found it on YouTube, you'll never know where it is. But I'll post the link on my Sherlock Holmes Magpie audio page, and that might help somebody, some people, some folk. And thanks for listening. I hope everyone is very well. And if not, I hope you're reasonably well and surviving. Surviving, that's the main thing. And take care. And what's that planet Extinction people? Didn't they do well? I don't know. Time will tell. And what are they called? Timely extinction, planet extinction, sort of environmental people who glue themselves to things, and well done for gluing yourself to things. And let's hope that, people will, heed the warning that, we've got, only 10 years to, I'm going to do what old Whatnot said this morning, that woman who used to go out with Kenneth Branagh, what's her name? You know the one I mean. She was down in London, wasn't she? She flew over on death-guzzling Boeing to be with the environmental people, didn't she? And she said when accused this morning of, being on these planes and, how hypocritical it was, telling us all to reduce our air miles, but she was flashing around the planet. Well, she said, I pay to, have my carbon offset. Do you? You pay to offset your carbon. Well, if anyone can show me the maths and show me exactly how that works, I'll be fascinated, because that seems to be stage one in the sleight of hand of ripping good, honest burgers off. And I don't mean burgers, I mean burgers. Yes, we managed to offset your carbon, which cost you $261 for this one flight, but we can't explain it because it's a complicated algorithm, but believe me, there are now 3 Leylandii growing somewhere in the Congo, which, explain how it works to me. It's just a con. It's just the emperor's clothes. And the sooner we wake up to that, plant trees, but don't go through some weird, I offset my carbon in order to fly across the Atlantic 53 times to audition in Hollywood or whatever it is. What's that woman's name? Sophie is her sister, who's always strikes me as, I think she does play up to it a little bit, the mad as a box of frogs kind of thing, but always seems very nice, and Sophie, surname. Thompson, that's right, Eric Thompson's lovely daughters, and the magic roundabout. Of course, waffling on a bit, this has been Greg Wagland reading to you reasonably, tolerably well today, although rather gluggy endings to some sentences. And, take care. Emma Thompson, she's all right. Got nothing against her, but I do fly a lot, but I've offset my carbon. Well, what does that even mean? Well, I could explain to you if you don't know. I could explain it to you. No, don't bother. Bye.